So, what if you could bring an endangered species back from the very brink of extinction by making a perfect genetic copy? I know, it sounds like something straight out of science fiction, but today we're going to dive into the very real science, the super high stakes, and yeah, the fierce debate around cloning to save animals. And it all really centers on this little one. This is Elizabeth Ann. She's a black-footed ferret who was born back in 2020, and she pretty much instantly became a global sensation. But here's the thing. She is not just any ferret. Her birth was a massive scientific breakthrough. And at the exact same time, it just kicked off this huge controversy. So why all the drama over one really cute animal? Well, it's because Elizabeth Ann is a clone, and that single fact forces us to ask some really tough questions. Just because we have this incredible scientific power, should we actually be using it? Okay, let's get into it. All right, so first up, let's talk about what makes Elizabeth Ann so incredibly special, and, why she's right at the heart of this huge debate. So for starters, Elizabeth Ann is a black-footed ferret, a species that for a while people thought was totally extinct. She is also the very first endangered species native to the U.S. to be successfully cloned. But get this is the wildest part. She is a perfect one-to-one genetic copy of a ferret named Willa, who died way back in the 1980s. I know, right? It sounds like a plot from a movie. So how on earth did they actually pull this off? Let's break down the science of how you actually make a clone. Okay, so put simply, a clone is just an exact copy of an organism, and it's created using its DNA, the blueprint for all life. Now, this technology isn't brand new. You might remember Dolly the sheep. She was the first mammal ever cloned, way back in 1996. And since then, we've cloned all sorts of animals, everything from cows to cats. So for Elizabeth Ann, scientists started with frozen cells from Willa, that ferret that died decades ago. They took her DNA, used it to create an embryo, and then they implanted that embryo into a surrogate mother, a totally normal domestic ferret, and then she just carried it to term. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? But the science it takes to actually make that happen is just mind-blowingly complex. So why? Why go through all of this incredible trouble? Well, the people who support it say this is an incredibly powerful new weapon in the desperate fight to save a species from just vanishing forever. I want you to look at this number, 7. That's it. Every single black-footed ferret that is alive in the world today, and there's about 550 of them, every single one is descended from just 7 ancestors. And that is a massive problem. When you have such a tiny gene pool, it's kind of like making a photocopy of a photocopy over and over again. All the bad traits, like poor eyesight and really weak immune systems, they just get passed down and amplified. This problem is called a genetic bottleneck, and it's a huge reason the species has had such a hard time bouncing back. And this is where Elizabeth Ann is a potential game changer. See, her DNA comes from before that bottleneck. So it's totally different. She represents a fresh wave of genetic diversity. If she has offspring, they could inject brand new, healthy genes back into the population, which could give the entire species a much better shot at survival. Ryan Phelan from Revive and Restore, that's the group behind this whole project, he really summed it up perfectly. He said, conservation needs more tools in the toolbox. So for supporters, cloning isn't some magic bullet, but it's a really vital new tool in the fight against extinction. But as you can imagine, not everyone is sold on this. The arguments against cloning are just as serious, just as compelling, and they really paint a much more complicated picture. So critics point to some major concerns. For starters, this is incredibly expensive. We're talking millions of dollars with absolutely no guarantee that it'll even work. Cloned animals also tend to have more health problems and shorter lifespans, and then you get into the huge ethical questions. But maybe the biggest point of all is this. Cloning does absolutely nothing to fix the problems that made the species endangered in the first place. Things like habitat loss and pollution. And that leads to this really critical question. If we start to believe that we can just clone animals back into existence whenever we want, does that make us less motivated to protect their homes right now? I mean, could this amazing technology just become a kind of get-out-of-jail-free card for not doing the hard work of conservation today? So we are left with two really powerful, really valid arguments. Let's put them side by side and just think about what this all means for the future of conservation. And this really shows you this central conflict, doesn't it? On one hand, you have this powerful new tool that could literally restore lost genetic diversity and buy an entire species precious time. But on the other hand, it's a really risky, really expensive, and ethically murky path that might just be a huge distraction from the real problems. There is no easy answer here. So what about Elizabeth Ann in the middle of all this? Well, the good news is she's reportedly healthy and doing great. She's probably curled up taking a nap right now with absolutely no idea that the future of her entire species and this massive scientific debate is kind of resting on her tiny little shoulders. And in the end, it all just boils down to that one fundamental question we started with. We now have the power to essentially bring back genetic lines of animals that have been gone for decades. But just because we can do it, does that really mean we should? That's the legacy of Elizabeth Ann, and it's the question she leaves for all of us to think about.